one is of that class. Then there's a second stream, which is a very small one, and it's based on ancient manuscripts. Let's not doubt that. And they represent in Greek the Vatican manuscript, or Codex B, in the library at Rome. And this one was used to counteract the Reformation, because it says different things to the one that the Reformers used. So at the time of the Reformation, Codex B became very prominent. And then we have the Semitic text, or Codex Aleph. Now that is one that was found in the region of Egypt. I'll show you the place later, and it comes from an Alexandrian text. So we have this one, and it was found on a very interesting date. It was found in 1844. 1844. So this is the youngest find of all the ancient manuscripts, and it is a very old document. So when it says in your new Bibles that this translation is based on ancient manuscripts, then the idea is planted that ancient means good. Are you with me? But ancient doesn't necessarily mean good. It just means ancient. That's all it means. In Latin, there's the Vulgate, or Latin Bible of Jerome, 383 AD. That's pretty old. And there are some problems with that, as we will see just now as well. In English, there's the Jesuit Bible of 1582. That was written in the vulgar tongue, if you like, to counteract the Reformation Bible, which later, with vast changes, is seen in the Douay, or Catholic Bible, which is the one on which the Good News Bible and all of those are based today, and in English again in many modern Bibles. The present controversy between the King James Bible in English and the modern version is the same old contest fought out between the early church rival sects. So the early church had this battle because these ancient manuscripts are different, and the modern church has this battle. So both of them had the battle. There was a battle in the beginning. There was a war in the middle when the Reformation came out, a literal war eventually over this word, and now we have another battle looming in our time, the final battle. This will be the last one, I think. That's my opinion. So, the battle was waged between the Valdenses and the Papists from the 4th to the 13th century, and later between the Reformers and the Jesuits in the 16th century, and today the battle is going to be waged between whoever represents the Bibles that these people also defended and whoever represents the other side. We need to understand that many of the new translations are taken from old manuscripts, no doubt, as I've explained. People think that these are more reliable. No, they're just old. In actual fact, they are saying, now listen carefully, that a manuscript that was found in a waste paper basket in a cave at Mount Sinai, and questionable manuscripts from Alexandria, where you had all this occultism, are more reliable than the received text. That's what they're saying. So these questionable ones are more reliable. In fact, the one found at Mount Sinai was thrown away because it had been copied over, rubbed out, and judging by the science of looking at how many times pieces had been rubbed out and rewritten, it seems that it has been rubbed out and rewritten in many places up to 70 times. In fact, it was so rubbed out and rewritten that they threw it away. But that is the manuscript on which everything is based today as reliable. Now, where do these manuscripts come from? Now, there's a man by the name of Arian who was an old initiate. We'll find him in the Masonic writings as an insider initiate. That's interesting. If I find somebody praised in the Masonic writings, my ears prick up. He was a textual critic, and he's supposed to have corrected numerous portions of the sacred manuscripts. Now, this is in ancient times. Evidence to the contrary shows that he changed them to agree with his human philosophy of mystical and allegorical ideas. For example, he believed that man was divine, and therefore there was not just one divine man that came to this earth. We are all divine, which is Masonic teaching even to this day. And so they believe that these manuscripts actually were corrupted. So from the birth of Christ to about 400 AD, some Gnostic Gospels appeared, and other writings were written. Paul makes mention of this, and he says in 2 Corinthians 2, verse 17, "For we are not as many which corrupt the word of God." So in Paul's time, were they corrupting the word of God, yes or no? Yes, they were corrupting it. And they were corrupting it with Gnostic ideas. And this is to bring them in line with an ecumenical thinking that all religions are basically the same. We shouldn't elevate one above another. In 331 AD, and this is where the problem really starts now, Constantine ordered an ecumenical Bible. You see, Christianity was saying Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and all the doctrines regarding to Christianity were problematic because they were in the face of paganism. And so Constantine, who tried to marry the two, he commissioned a man by the name of Eusebius, who was, by the way, a follower of Arian, to write an ecumenical Bible. And that is to change the Word of God using Gnostic writings so that it would be acceptable to pagans as well as to Christians. And that's what they did. But the early Christians rejected these manuscripts and said they are not from God. And so they went into secret libraries, and there they lay, later to be dug up as ancient manuscripts. There were about 50 copies made by Eusebius, and they were distributed, and they ended up largely in two areas, namely in Rome and in Alexandria, where you had the esoteric studies. For example, we'll go into that a little bit later. And Origen believed in the so-called Arian heresy. Now, the Arian heresy is that Jesus was not God, and that God is basically, if you like, a form of pantheistic God in everything, so we basically could also have a divine spark in us, which is Masonic teaching. Now, it's interesting that Roman Catholicism claims that it's anti-Arian, and that it fought wars and destroyed people that were Arian. There is no evidence, let me tell you now, there is no historic evidence that the nations that were destroyed because they were Arian, like the Ostrogoths, for example, or the Vandals, that they were actually Arian, because we have none of their writings. Every piece of their literature has been destroyed. We only have the word of Roman Catholicism that they were Arian. But now I have some interesting news for you. Remember I told you yesterday that the Templars have two doctrines. One is exoteric and one is esoteric. One is for the goyim, for the cattle, and one is for the insiders. Now the gospel to the outside is non-Arian, but the insider gospel of Roman Catholicism is Arian. Now what do you do with that? And how do I know that it's Arian? It's because the Pope has declared the Vulgate as an infallible Bible, and the Vulgate is Arian. It removes the deity of Christ. Isn't that interesting? So what's the battle about? The battle is about Jesus Christ, just as it was since prehistory. The battle is about the Son of God. And who are we going to defend? Jesus or someone else? So this is an interesting battle. I find this a fascinating battle. 1481 AD, the Vatican manuscript was discovered in the Vatican Library. Isn't that interesting? Just in time to counter the Reformation. Just in time. Because the Reformation was using the received text. There was no other text. So you must now believe that up until 1481, God had kept the truth of the Bible away from all generations up to 1481. They all were based on wrong manuscripts. And fortunately, the Vatican discovered the right manuscript in 1481 to counter the Reformation. And this manuscript repeatedly sets aside the deity of Christ, and it's Arian. So that is insider doctrine. This is Templar doctrine, because we saw it yesterday in the lecture that we did yesterday. And it is probably a manuscript that survived from Eusebius. And by the way, this one and the one that they found at Sinai are birds of a feather that flock together. They are very much the same. So that's why there are basically only two streams. The vast majority, Textus Recepticus, and then this stream. And then the magic date, 1844. The Sinitic manuscript is discovered at Mount Sinai in a monastery in St. Catherine's. Very interesting. That's the old Coptic church, which is basically the Eastern Byzantine church, which was exactly the same as Catholicism because they were one and the same. And it agrees absolutely with the Vatican manuscript, and it is totally Arian. By 1881, two professors from Britain, Westcott and Hort, created the Greek text. And this is based, of course, on these manuscripts, on the Vatican manuscript and the Sinai manuscript, leaning heavily on the Sinai manuscript so that it wouldn't appear too overly Catholic. Are you with me? Mustn't appear too overly Catholic, because these were Protestants. Well, let's rather say they were supposedly Protestants. And the Jehovah's Witness Bible was then changed as a result of this new writing. Now, this was in the early 1900s when these things started coming out, and the Jehovah's Witnesses had no other Bible than the King James. So one day, they were told, take your King James Bibles, and as they came in, they were given a thick black pen, and they were told, now, let's modify the King James. Cross out, zap, 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 whatever it is, and they crossed out. They didn't have their Bible. It didn't exist in the early 1900s, so the Jehovah's Witnesses were the first to just cross out huge sections of the Bible. I'll show you that tomorrow night, what they crossed out. And it must be emphasized that the argument is therefore not between an ancient text and a recent one, but between two ancient texts. Are you with me? That's the argument. And, well, it's an interesting one. Now, Tyndale, he, of course, used the received text, and this really irritated the Vatican, because the other one hadn't been found yet, by the way. And he used the received text in his Bible and said to the Pope, if God spare my life, before many years I will cause a boy that driveth a plough to know more about the Scriptures than thou doest. That was quite a statement. Once again, I would like to reiterate, the argument is not King James versus other versions. The argument is received text, textus recepticus, versus the small little stream that comes from Sinai and the Vatican. That's the argument. By the way, any Bible in any language that existed before the 1900s is received text. So if you go to Serbia, they have the received text. If you go to Greece, they have the received text in Greek. If you go to any country in the world, the Lutheran Bible, any Bible, they're all based on received text.